Hey guys, so about a month ago I did a ban list prediction survey to gather your thoughts on what might happen on the next ban list, whenever that might be. But you know what, I'll link that down in the description below. But today I thought I'd do my own ban list prediction, and I'm going to try to keep it as realistic as possible in terms of, what cards might get hit, but more so in terms of also the number of cards that will actually change on the ban list. Because as much as we want, tens of cards to get changed on the next ban list, or every ban list rather, realistically Konami doesn't make too many changes on each list for the most part. So starting right off, I think, let's just get to the really easy one, which is what most people are gearing towards, is just that Mind Hacker ban. I get it, they don't go into this line of play as much as they did at the beginning of the Cashier format, but the line of play still exists, and it's not really healthy for the game. Getting rid of extra deck monsters that easily. Unicorn still exists, but at the same time, I think this card is certainly on the chopping block, and I think it will probably get banned at this point. The other ban card that I think not many people are talking about, that I personally think could happen, is Anti-Spell Fragrance. And this is a card that I honestly thought should have been banned about a year ago, actually, or maybe even before that. But realistically, the fact that, being able to essentially shut down a game mechanic in terms of, spells, but particularly Pendulum mechanic, you just can't do it at all with Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, on one hand, I know you guys are jumping to, oh, this is just going to make Super Heavies even stronger than they already will be in the next format. And I get that, and that's kind of the downside. But the thing is, with Super Heavy Samurai, if everyone starts playing Anti-Spell because of them, then it's just going to hurt so many other decks, and that I think is a bigger problem. And especially nowadays where you have at least one negate on top of the Anti-Spell Fragrance, you're just not going to be able to play, and I don't think that's really good for the game. And I think cards like this, now personally, I think, for example, if Spell Counselor is a card that is actually going to see a lot of play in Super Heavy Samurai, I mean, it would be nice if this card would also get debanned, and just any kind of card that are completely shutting down certain mechanics of the game, key components, especially spells, I don't think it's really good for this game. And so, of course, there's other cards similar to that vein, where let's say like Jinzo or Royal Decree for traps, which for the most part has never really seen too much competitive play. But although recently against Labyrinth, that matchup, it actually did see play, both of those cards. I mean, if those cards were ever to get banned, I don't think anyone really complained, because I don't think we really care about traps that much. But spells, I think that's just too critical, and Anti-Spell Fragrance, I think, is just far too strong, and hopefully it does get addressed. Another card that does shut down mechanics, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make any changes to this. But at the same time, and especially with D-Barrier seeing a decline in play in terms of competitive YCS topping lists, as you would see in my YCS top cut breakdowns. But at the same time, Konami has shown that they are hitting cards certainly well after its actual problematic state. For example, Artifact Scythe got banned a lot after, when it was actually problematic, especially to kind of future-proof things in the event that it does return in whatever combo, which it probably would have. And I think similarly with D-Barrier, even if it's slightly going down in play, it's still pretty strong. And you know what, it's probably going to be problematic in years to come, and probably should get debanned at some point, hopefully sooner than later. In terms of Sprite, so for those of you watching and follow my channel, you'll know that I've been playing Sprite since release, and I do really like the deck. I think in terms of hitting it, in terms of if you have to now keep hitting the consistency, which I think is what they're trying to do each time, because they've shown right off the bat they banned Ronin Totem, which is an indirect hit, but it was a big one at the time, and they did it pretty soon after the release of Sprite. So they're not worried, or they're certainly going to keep hitting Sprite, it seems. I think blue is one way to limit it. Now, to be honest with you, if you were to ask me, I think at this point, Sprite is shown to be so resilient in terms of any kind of consistency hits, is even something as big as Elf, that they can still be a tier 1 deck, because their turn 1 board is usually so strong that, it kind of forces your opponent into submission. And the grind game, while it's certainly worse now than it was before, the grind game does not matter as much still, because their turn 1 board is so strong. And so, personally, if you were to ask me, I would have actually just banned Sprint. Probably won't happen on the next list, but whatever future list, they probably will, because I think that's a big hit to Sprite. I think at this point, little slap on the wrist on Sprite just isn't doing it, and they're just going to keep being resilient and do well. I think Sprint is a really big one after Elf, and Giganticus, of course, is also another good one, but I think Sprint is something that would potentially get banned at some point in the future as well. Another card that, probably should get changed, but probably won't, is Eradicator. I think the play of Labyrinth has really gone down in play a lot in terms of competitive success at YCS level events, that this probably has now fallen off the radar. But again, if it's a card that might come back in the future and be problematic, probably something worthy of hitting. In terms of other limits, I think I'm going to go straight into the Cashier cards, and Fenrir and Unicorn. Unicorn more so specifically for Cashier. I think this card on its own is just way too strong. And you know what? Cashier has been around at least for a few months now. It's probably time to actually start hitting their consistency at this point, but not actually kill the deck. Fenrir is more so actually for every other deck other than Cashier. I think it's still going to see play moving into the next format, and just being able to search itself as well, just kind of strong. I think limiting it would be nice, and I think a lot of people are also predicting this would happen, and you know, not too many Cashier hits. I mean, I think of course these are certainly noticeable, and also Rebirth is another potential consideration, but at the same time, I think especially what they did with tier elements, where they just kind of hit the names directly, I think Rebirth is obviously a very strong card, but if you continue to hit like the actual names, then perhaps it's not as problematic. Runic, this is interesting. I originally was going to go with just Tip, because I felt like they probably won't hit it too much, at least in its first hit to Runic, but you know what, perhaps they just go straight with the Fountain, and that, because that's what really matters most. Unfortunately, it would really hamper any kind of like Runic whatever variant, but I think Konami has shown that they really don't like draw cards, right? They've limited or hit any a bunch of different kind of like decks that draw too much, and I think this is certainly on the radar for a potential limit. I mean, there are ways to get it back, at least from the grave, but who knows? I'm not quite sure, but I really do hope that they do hit Runic in some capacity. I think Naturia Runic is, you know, essentially like top 3 deck right now, but I think it's really the Runic part that's really carrying them. Naturia is really good, no doubt, but I don't think you should be hitting Naturia directly, in my opinion. Some other hits. So Gimmick Puppet, this is interesting. I was deciding between the Expulsion and Gimmick Puppet, and ideally I think I would actually ban both, and I'm actually playing Branded right now, and I think there's just really strong Incandescent Dragon, or rather Sanctified Dragon, that's about to come in Cyberstorm Access, is going to be able to do kind of similar to what Expulsion can do, although you know, access to Expulsion is a lot easier, especially with all your other Branded stuff end board that you're going to do. But I think at this point I would actually ban Gimmick Puppet. Again, I would ideally just ban both, but probably they won't do that, but who knows, maybe they will. And it's because I get it, you know, there are other cards that can replace Gimmick Puppet. There's the Rawlock, there's like Idol, and there's like even that DDD monster, I believe, that's like you can only summon fiends essentially. But I think Gimmick is certainly the strongest of them all. At least with the other ones, you can like try to, if you can clear your own monsters, then you can still play, but Gimmick, you're just completely locked, and there's just really not much you can do. So personally, I would just get rid of Gimmick Puppet Lock. I think, especially with Sanctified Dragon available, like one of these two cards, or at least both of those cards, need to get, in terms of Expulsion and Gimmick Puppet, need to get addressed, because it is just far too easy to get this lock going on multiple, and not only on the first turn, but you can just constantly loop it, especially with Tragedy. Essentially, you have an unlimited way of Gimmick Puppeting, locking your opponent at the current moment. In terms of semi-limits, you know what? I figured they were kind of putting the True Draco cards off the list. So you know what? Dragonic Diagram, it's at 1. They're probably going to maybe put it at 2. I think no one's really going to care. It's certainly a strong field spell. Not strong as it is, I guess, nowadays, compared to whatever field spell like you look at, you know, something like the tier limit field spell. Much stronger than what True Draco Dragonic Diagram can do. So another card, Gazelle. Probably, honestly, you could unlimit this as well, but they're probably just going to start semi-limiting. That's sort of the trend that they've shown with all these ban lists, is just, you know what, semi-limit, and then the next list, just unlimit them. And I think solid players, they deserve to get Gazelle back. I think it's fine at 2. You know, it's not nearly at the same level that it once was a few years ago, so I think it's fine to do. Skill Drain, this, I do not understand why it ever came back to 3. I don't know if it was purely from the purpose of promoting the sale of Labyrinth cards, and just it was more of a business decision, or they actually felt that Skill Drain was okay to be at 3, in which case it definitely is not okay. This card should not be at more than 1. I think if anything, they should just ban it, but at the same time, you know, I get it, there are various ways to get out of it, but it's just not really a fun card to have around. And I think it being at 1 was, yes, it's sucky, but at least it's not something that you would see constantly in like whatever Floodgate trap deck. So hopefully it also just goes back to its original place. Ibli, you know, I think this will not see change. I think it is a card certainly that, again, similar to like Gimmick Puppet, maybe like it can get banned, and I don't think people would complain. I think it's better for the game if a card like this is gone, because it'll probably come back again at some point in the future with whatever new archetype that comes out. But for now, you know, it has been seeing decline in play, although it sort of kind of came back for a little bit. But I think for now it's okay. But you know what, certainly a consideration for ban. So I honestly think, and I know I say this pretty much every list, but I think they will finally semi-limit Pot of Prosperity now. Now at this point, they've already, you know, reprinted it, with, you know, whatever tints, and it's just far too strong. I love this card. I don't think it can stay at 3. If anything, it will probably go to 1 at some point in the future. They'll probably start with the semi-limit, but I don't think this card should be unlimited. It is far too strong and helps tier 1 decks too much. Like you've seen it with Sprite, for example, and also with Kashtira right now. With Super Heavy Samurai, I don't think they can, but you know, in the future, whatever new archetypes, for the most part, they're going to be able to play it, and I think it's just too strong. While it's great for rogue decks, it just helps tier 1 decks a lot more. Another thing in terms of unlimited, I don't really have much to unlimit. I think Rosella Starling, this was at 2 a couple lists ago. I was actually surprised they didn't put it back to 3 on the last list. I think it will at this point. I don't think anyone's really worried about Bird Up anymore at this point. No offense to them. I think it's still a fun deck, but at this point I think sort of that phase is gone, and if you're playing Tri-Brigade, you're probably playing it as Tri-Brigade Sprite to have the best chance competitively speaking. Another card, I actually think they would just put Orange back to 3. If you recall, this got put to 1 in that really random December ban list when Ishizu tier was tier 0, and some might consider that as an emergency ban list where they just basically put this to 1, and that was the only change for tier limits at the time, because of course it was really strong being able to, like, you know, send this and like one of the Shizu cards and mill 5 or whatever, or even like the shufflers. It was just really good. But you know what, at this point the Earth Shuffler, like all the Shizu cards, the relevant ones at least, are at 1, and you know, they've been kind of giving support back to Drytron anyways, and you know, Eva's still banned, so that with Orange, yes, that was definitely toxic. But and as much as I hate Drytron, I think it's okay for Orange to just go back to 3, because that initial hit was more so to try to curb, well, not really, but try to do some kind of indirect hit to tier limits. But now that they actually directly hit tier limits and hit all their names, I think Orange can just come back to 3 as well. Some other cards that I don't think will actually get addressed, but probably should. Super Poly, I love this card, don't get me wrong, but I think it is far too strong to not be able to respond. I remember this coming back to 3 in like 2019 or so. It was like, it was at 1, then it got back to 2, and then to 3, and I'm not sure why. It's certainly been fun playing this in whatever format throughout the years. You know, Shadal Invoked was one that made very good use of this as well a few years ago, and so now, you know, with Branded, they're just it is a really strong deck, and you just, even in the, especially in the mirror, like it's just crazy depending on who draws Super Poly, and I think it's just far too strong. You cannot respond to it. This should probably go back to 1 at some point. And then I put Engage just for fun. I think a lot of people think this will come back to 2. I really don't think so. Again, with how I mentioned about Konami not liking draw cards and usually limiting them, I think semi-limiting Engage, I don't know if they would really do that. To be honest with you, I was actually very shocked this came back to 1 in the first place, even before cards like Harp Horror, which I think can certainly come back. But at this point, I sort of given up hope on Harp Horror, considering that they just are not making any changes to that. But anyways, that is my ban list prediction. Hopefully, this list comes out at some point within the next week or so, just because, you know, we do have a couple of ICS events later in May, and of course, they always like to give at least, like, you know, a couple weeks for players to be able to prepare for these in-person events, because they do have to get cards. So anyways, certainly let me know in the comments. You can rip apart this prediction. Certainly fine with that. I'd really like to have an engaging discussion with you all. So thanks for watching, and take care, guys.